But when you add up these things and, men competing in women's sports and uh, just too much indoctrination of children with ideas that they're too young to understand, it paints a picture, not a wrong picture, in the mind of the average voter that, yeah, maybe these people just seem crazy.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope all is good wherever you are. Just finished watching the Club Random podcast. Bill Maher had Tim Pool on there. It's actually a pretty good conversation. They agreed on a lot of stuff. Let's get to the first bit, and I'll give you my thoughts in between the clips.
You know what's fascinating is my neighborhood from Chicago turned red, and
Yeah.
so my audience, the biggest demographic is location-wise is Chicago, and it's a weird position to be in because to see Chicago's liberal. My neighborhood was by the Midway Airport, and it's a lot of firefighters and cops,
Yeah.
and it's largely like Polish immigrant and then like white working class and Hispanic, and it flipped for Trump in Chicago, and I think.
Some parts of the Bronx, too.
Oh, wow. I think
Yeah.
my politics are like, if you were, I'm like a Chicago liberal, but the way things have gone, especially with like the woke stuff, this is where I end up in this position, and so does my neighborhood. I think it's interesting to see my neighborhood reflective of my politics and vice versa.
I think the phrase I was using last year was aggressively non-common sense or uncommonsensical. And it's like I accent aggressively. I don't think the woke people who have the vast amount of energy really in the Democratic Party understand why the people vote against them. And it's like, because if you add up like how many people are really affected by some of the aggressively uncommon sense things, it's probably not that many.
You had a great bit on that.
Yeah.
Why are you pandering to 400 people?
Of course. Okay. But when you add up these things and, men competing in women's sports and uh, just too much indoctrination of children with sexual ideas that they're too young to understand, like when you add up all these things that get in the media a lot, it paints a picture, not a wrong picture, in the mind of the average voter that, yeah, maybe policy-wise, I would do better under the Democrats or Bernie Sanders, but these other people just seem fucking crazy. They seem like committed to just going to absurd lengths just for shits and giggles, just for the fuck of it, just this bizarre attachment to things that are just ridiculous.
I think it's to hate the other side.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's certainly what the other side does. They call it making you cry your liberal tears.
Oh, yeah.
The entire policy, well, not always now. There are some things that have different motivations. I know you're involved with the tariff debate
Oh, yeah.
because, that works both ways. Sometimes free trade does hurt people.
Yep.
And that's why there are Trump is not the first person to advocate tariffs. He's just the first person to do it in this kind of crazy, haphazard way.
Right, I agree. And I think that, when he announced selective tariffs, I was like, all right, let's go. Then when he announced universal tariffs, I was like, I don't know if that makes sense. What is he doing? And I'm not in. I think one of the problems that we've seen over the past several years with Trump is the immediate assumption that he's a crazy person all the time. And so the only thing I can say is, well, look, I vote for the guy. I think this is probably doesn't make sense to me, but I'll see what happens and we'll see if it makes sense. Selective tariffs, I think, do make sense. But I do think that the way the Democratic Party has handled opposition has guaranteed the kind of Trumpian politics.
Well, I'm sure you heard about my little trip to the White House.
Absolutely.
And
very impressive.
Thank you. And the thing that upset the far left so much, these same people who believe in the crazy things I was just mentioning, and the ones who really hate me, they really found a new reason to hate me because when I came back and gave my report about it, among the things I said, to your point about everything is he crazy, was, I think, word for word, a crazy person doesn't live in the White House.
Mhm.
A person who plays a crazy person on TV lives in the White House.
Yeah.
And they found that very triggering. But again, as I said many times during that piece, I'm just going to tell you the truth. I didn't vote for him. I think we all know that. I went right back to being as tough on him as I ever had been. So I wasn't like seduced, but that was my estimation. Again, to your point about is he just crazy? When you meet him in person and spend that kind of time, and he's not on his like his attack mode
Yeah.
thing, um, he does not strike you as a crazy person or a person who doesn't listen or can't hear things. Again, they were very mad at me for saying this, but that's what happened. And I am not a liar. That's my main bond with the audience. So even if I offended some people by telling the truth, in the long run, that's what I do. And
You know,
yeah,
what I saw in 2020, I was not going to vote for Trump. I'll never vote for Trump. I don't like Trump. And I donated the max to Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard. And my position, my whole thought process was the Democrats are going crazy, and we need the moderate, sane Democrats to maintain control of this party and stop the insanity.
correct.
And they lost.
And they lost.
And so then Trump put out his statement in around August saying, we're going to ban DEI in government contracting. We're going to do these things, blah, blah, blah. No new wars was big for me. I'm a very, anti-interventionist for a lot of reasons. And so I said, I guess I'm voting for Trump. Instantly, it was like the liberals, even YouTube, they all said, we're going to move your name over to this list. I kid you not. There's representatives at YouTube. They told me straight up that the liberal rep was no longer representing me and they were switching me to a conservative rep. It was the weirdest thing. Yeah. And I'm like, it's not that I like who Trump is or that I'm like thinking that conservatives have good policy. I'm pro-choice. The issue is that you can look at it right now. There's no charismatic leaders. There's no front runners. There's no policy position. It seems like the only thing they ever had is the right is bad, Trump is bad.
It was funny reading the comments on the YouTube video of this podcast because there was a lot of people commenting about Tim Pool not pushing back against Bill Maher on a couple of small little topics. But these were conservatives commenting, and we have to remember that Tim Pool's not a conservative. He's closer to a conservative than he is a woke lefty liberal right now, but he'd be more of like a libertarian, in my opinion. He's a common sense dude, but he's not a conservative. But on this point, it wasn't hard to agree, right? The left, they're on the fringe. Everything they've done for the last 4 years when Biden was in office, their whole shtick was still Trump bad, even when the guy wasn't there. To the point that they tried to put the guy in jail. I will still tell you, and this is my opinion, that them raiding Melania's closet in Mar-a-Lago will go down as the biggest political mishap in history. The guy was out, maybe he was going to run, maybe he wasn't going to run again. But this created Trump 2.0, and I'm so happy, hindsight being 2020, no pun intended, that he didn't win in 2020 because now he knows where the bodies are buried. He's got a better team around him, and Trump 2.0 is way more savage and efficient than he was before. Let's get back to it.
And that really is that's the relationship of my life.
You're obviously an atheist.
Yes.
Famously religious. I saw it when you put it out.
Oh,
and
good, thank you.
I know I was lapsed Catholic, briefly atheist. Now I'm not Christian. I don't like the word deist, but the future we're seeing this massive push towards Christianity and like young people are
Yes.
adopting it.
What do you make of that?
Well, one thing I think is true is that conservatives had more kids in the 2000s. I know a lot of people want to claim these ideological victories where they say like we've red-pilled people. And I've pointed this out for years. No, just in like 2003, there were a couple studies that came out saying that liberals were having less kids than conservatives. Well, 20 years later, what do you expect to see? There's going to be more conservative people than liberal people just because the parents had kids.
Right.
I do think also that one of the more interesting trends, however, is that among Gen Z, irrespective of that, there's been a rightward ideological shift among men. And I think this has to do with contemporary politics, movies, games, culture, etc.
And also men feeling that they were targeted unfairly. There is a lot of toxicity in being maleness. Some of that we can't control. Some of that is just how we're born. We were drawn that way. You know, boys are going to be more rambunctious in school. They're going to be harder to discipline.
Yeah.
They're going to have more excess energy. and we kind of we went like we do with everything, went overboard and made it seem sometimes like maleness itself was on trial.
It's like a race to the bottom.
So it's not what?
It was a race to the bottom of all these different cultural elements trying to one up what was wrong with masculinity.
Yeah, kind of. And it's not surprising that they would run to Trump.
Yep.
They would run to the guy. I mean, it's kind of like, why do cops vote for Trump? Well, the guy who's like out there saying they're not the enemy, and they're not. I mean, there are things that obviously should be criticized about the police too, which Trump would never do, because
Yep.
he's always all in on one way. But I can totally understand if you're a cop, you feel very misunderstood, and you are, and you understand that you do something that the society needs, and they don't seem very grateful about it.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, so it's kind of similar to that.
People, man, there's one prominent cop. I think this is Donut Operator. I could be wrong, so forgive me if I'm getting the guy wrong. But he was a cop, and I could be getting the guy wrong. But the thing that these cops deal with that people don't understand is they see these negative stories in the press all the time. And yeah, when there's a bad cop doing a bad thing, let's lock him up, let's put him in jail. But my dad was a firefighter, and he told me when I was younger, he's like, never be a cop, because the things these guys deal with,
Yeah.
one day, like you're getting a phone call about a domestic violence incident. You show up and some guy screaming in your face, spitting on you, swinging at you, and then you go and see a mother holding her dead son who got hit by a car in one day. And then these people are they deal with this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And then what happens is they go to a store where there's some minor altercation and they're not having it. And these cops are assholes, man. And it's like, that man just watched a child die and the mother scream, and now you're bothering him over some like petty BS at a supermarket.
Right.
So it is pretty brutal. But then I do think, I say this somewhat facetiously, ban the internet, get rid of social media, because it puts people in these bubbles where they only see the bad thing. And I think it's making people go crazy. So we're talking about the younger generation, right? Here's one really interesting phenomenon in the political polarization. In the end of the 2000s on Facebook, the top content was police brutality. And there was one website that was one of the top global websites that only made articles about police brutality. Why? Hit all the algorithmic points: shock content, justice, anger. And so imagine you're 10 years old in 2010, and you go on a Facebook. Maybe you're not supposed to, but you do. What do you find? BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, Mike.com, and they're blasting you with nothing but black man killed, unarmed black man killed. The reason they were doing this was Facebook found that after around 300 friends or likes, the chronological feed becomes incomprehensible. And they wanted to make sure that people stayed on the page longer. So they created the algorithm. That's why if you post, I'm getting married or having a baby, you will appear on the top of everyone's feeds. It's true. Yeah, it works.
Yeah.
At the time, they didn't do this intentionally, but they created an algorithm that if it got shared more, it got promoted more. And so what happened was, first, that these websites like Huffington Post found that an article that said something like racist thing happens would get more shares. So they made more of it. Eventually, a great example is Mike.com, M-I-C. It started as a Ron Paul libertarian freedom website. It was trending on the internet in 2008. And then it turned into social justice, intersectional feminism, and police brutality, because that was generating most of the shares on Facebook. So these younger kids who are 10 or whatever are inundated with nothing but this. What happens? There's this famous video where a guy goes to Venice Beach and he asks people, how many unarmed black men do you think were killed by police last year? And they say 1,000, 10,000.
Yeah.
It was 9.
I know.
And it's because the media, or I should say social media, was propping up select stories over and over and over again. And where it gets crazy is even the same story every week.
But let's look at what's behind that. What's behind that? What it is white guilt. There's a certain segment of the left that feels very bad about the horrible racist history of our country, which they themselves probably participated not at all in.
Yeah.
And they are just constantly doing things that they think are for someone else, but I think are for themselves.
I completely agree.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a lot of self-flagellating themselves about the racial issue, which of course the history is appalling, and the present has problems too, racially in this
Yeah.
country. But they make it worse. Let's put it just in general. They
I
make it
agree.
they make it worse, and it's really about how it's not about actually helping making any black lives better. Actually, that doesn't really happen from all their hyperventilating. It makes them feel a certain way. It makes them that's what people have to
Have
realize
you
about that.
have you followed any of the Chicago stuff with Mayor? What's
Oh,
Brandon?
Brandon Justice,
You want to know what's really fascinating about that?
he's worse than the last one.
Oh, he's terrible. But you know how he won? White guilt.
Yes, yes.
Let me,
No,
let me,
I understand.
but wait, it's good. So I actually took the electoral map of vote breakdown by neighborhood, overlaid it with the racial breakdown per neighborhood, and what do we find? Every black neighborhood, their top 3 candidates were black. Even people who weren't frontrunners or polling anywhere near didn't matter. The black neighborhoods did not vote for any white guy or Latinos. The Latino neighborhood, guess what? Latino guys. The white neighborhoods, white guys, except for one, the college liberal area of Loyola.
Sure.
They voted for Johnson.
Yeah.
And so even though
And
Johnson
that tipped
wasn't,
the election?
that tipped it.
Yeah.
And so people thought there was this white dude that all of the suburbanites were going to vote for. Not the suburbanites, but it's Chicago, so it's not suburban. But like the outskirts in the Northwest. And he did really well. But when Loyola college liberals was the one area where it was predominantly white that voted for the black candidate, put it over the edge, and this is what you get.
Tim's 100% right with those stats about the police officers. When you consider, you look at the black community, right? Over 10,000 people were killed in gang violence last year in the black community by other blacks, right? Not by white people, not by police officers, over 10,000 of them. You think that would be your bigger issue versus the 9 quote unquote unarmed people that were killed, or black people that were killed by police officers. And I say quote unquote unarmed because the stats come, I'm sure Tim's getting them from the same place, from the Washington Journal, and they're very liberal in how they define unarmed. But if you looked at the stats on how many unarmed white people were killed by police officers, you would think there's a pandemic on police officers killing white people. The media just doesn't cover it, so you don't hear about it. Police officers in the country, I'm happy they're getting their mojo back. More and more, as the years progress, they're dealing with harsher criminals every time they go somewhere. It's good to see them get their mojo back. These idiot defund the police people. What, you want to live in an area with no police officers? Guess who the first people are to always want to call the cops is these liberal people in these liberal cities that don't want to own a firearm to protect their homes. And then they don't want police officers. The criminals have guns, though, because, the guns are there illegally. This is what we need. In those cities where they don't understand is that it's not the guns, it's the criminals. We need harsher punishments for criminals. You get caught with a gun that you purchased illegally, you commit a crime with an illegal gun, you get 5 years automatic, 10 years automatic, pick something, right? I didn't really flesh this out, but this catch and release stuff and these little slap on the wrist to the people that are committing these crimes, it's not law-abiding good American citizens. Anyways, back to the point that it's good to see the cops get their mojo back. Let's get back to it.
Yeah,
Now they're all mad.
the living here in California, trust me, the concept of liberal in theory. This is something I say very often. People who are liberals in theory, and then you see how they live, like terrible to the household help.
Yeah.
Like consider their assistants, because everyone out here has to have an assistant. They can't do anything for themselves. I mean, I do too, but I never call my assistant on the weekend or after hours. Most people here consider their assistant a 24/7 slave. This is what I mean
Yeah.
about liberal in theory. Yeah, in theory, you're a liberal, but like, how do you actually live your life? And of course, like very privilegey, and they absolutely hate privilege, but their whole life is sustained by the privilege of not being having to be practical or knowledgeable about a lot of things which they pontificate on and act like they're knowledgeable about. And also just, like many homes, like expensive vacations. I mean, it's not like they are, um, if you really feel that bad about it, switch houses with someone in Compton.
But
Let
this
them
is
live here in your house, and you could live in their house, and then you'll feel better.
this is a part of what I call wokeness. Everybody's always trying to define it some way.
Right.
But I define it specifically as cult-like adherence to the liberal orthodoxy. And the reason why I say that is because being in media and cultural spaces for the past 15 years, watching all of this, the conservatives like to say it's DEI, it's race, but that doesn't explain support for certain institutions, support for war in Ukraine, doesn't explain the Me Too movement. These are all different things. It doesn't explain support for Islam, particularly, which is the second biggest religion in the world. So it's not about critical theory or anything like that. It's about looking like you're virtuous. So these liberals who live the way you're describing it want to make sure that as they're seen outwardly to other liberals, they are perfectly in line with what is virtuous and right. We call it virtue signaling. But it can manifest into literally anything. Like, again, supporting the second largest religion in the world while claiming that they're oppressed, but massive.
Well, I mean, there's so much to get into here. One is the word liberal, very fraught for me because I still think I'm a liberal. I think woke is a different thing.
I agree. Yeah.
I mean, but your example about Islam is completely right. And it's one of the main reasons why the far left started to really hate me is because I call out Islam as what it is, extremely illiberal. That's what's so ironic about liberals being so supportive of Hamas is because you're liberals. And these are the people, I'm sorry, but this ideology, Islam, even in its more benign forms, yes, I agree. The vast majority of Muslims, not terrorists, of course, but Islamists, which is the word we use to describe people who are not terrorists, but kind of agree with the things terrorists are doing and are for, that's a much higher number. That's many millions of people. And even the rank and file, I mean, most Muslim societies live under some form of Sharia law, which no Westerner who thinks that Hamas is so great could ever live under. Your fundamental rights that you take for granted here in America, you would not have. I mean, all the protesters who are protesting in Gaza against Hamas, they've all been killed.
Right.
They killed protesters. Women, I mean, do I have to say anything more than just if it was just that issue, how women are treated? Are you fucking kidding me?
And the narrative is, when I talk to some of these academics, like the anti-woke people, they're like, well, it's because they say that, Gaza is oppressed. And I'm like, sure, but they're
By
siding
Hamas.
with the second biggest religion in the world, which is authoritarian, fundamentalist. And like, I don't care if you practice whatever religion you want to practice, it's fine. But it's strange to me to claim that Islam is oppressed in any meaningful way.
Well, I do care what you practice, and I fully defend to the death your right to practice whatever religion you want. Just don't lie to me and say all religions are alike. All religions are not alike, and what makes them different mostly is how fundamentalist they are.
Yeah, I thought this was a good podcast. And they're right at the end when they talk about Islam. We're having people coming into our countries from Islamic countries. A lot of them come here. They undermine everything that we do. They undermine our values and our way of life. They hate the American way. Why are we letting these people into the country? What are they bringing to the country? And I don't mean everybody who is Muslim. There are some good Muslim. My doctor was a Muslim. Great guy. It's not everybody, but it's a lot of them. Not all religions are created equal. But I don't want to get too deep into the weeds of that right now because this is just like a fun little conversation between two very successful men. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, as usual, consider subscribing to the channel if it's not your first time here and you're not yet subscribed. Also, leave a thumbs up if you made it this far, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out, everybody.